Welcome to the recorded version of the Grantmakers in Aging web seminar, Financing Innovation, the LeverAge Program and GIA's Partnership Role, featuring Robert Jenkins, Director of Social Impact Initiatives and Senior Vice President at the National Cooperative Bank, Niles Godis, Senior Vice President for Housing and Capital at LeverAge, and John Feather, CEO of Grantmakers in Aging. From December 17, 2014. This event was made possible by a partnership between Grantmakers in Aging, the John A. Hartford Foundation, the McGregor Foundation, National Cooperative Bank, and LeverAge. Technical and production support is provided by the American Society on Aging.
Thanks, Steve, and welcome to everyone, and welcome to Conversations with GIA, part of our monthly series of webinars on critical topics on aging. As Steve told you, today's session is entitled Financing Innovation, the LeverAge Program and GIA's Partnership Role. And I am John Feather, the CEO of Grantmakers in Aging. Before we begin, I want to thank those whose support is making today's webinar available free of charge to all of you. The John A. Hartford Foundation of New York provides continuing support for the webinar series. And for this specific program, the McGregor Foundation of Cleveland, the National Cooperative Bank, and LeverAge have all supported the program. We also want to thank the expert team at the American Society on Aging for providing technical and production support for the series. According to the National Association of Affordable Housing Lenders, a critical component of meeting the need for affordable aging services, senior housing models, and emerging aging innovations is readily available, consistently priced long-term care financing. And long-term financing, LeverAge is a new program for a new national financing program designed to assist in the expansion of these services. The LeverAge program offers not-for-profit organizations this and more, using mission deposits to provide affordable rates, flexible structures, and credit support features necessary to meet the needs of expanding low-income focused programs and emerging innovations. We are glad that you've joined us today to learn more about this exciting program, how it can assist the program projects that you fund, and how you can support its growth. Joining me today are two experts involved in this program, and we're delighted to have them with us. Robert Jenkins is the Director of Social Impact Initiatives and Senior Vice President at the National Cooperative Bank. And Niles Godis is the Senior Vice President for Housing and Capital at LeverAge. Welcome to you both.
Thanks, John. Thank you.
Normally, I moderate these sessions and introduce them and have the speakers move on, but GIA has a unique role in this particular program because we're one of the founding partners of LeverAge. So I will also participate to some degree today as well. And the next slide shows you our agenda for the day. So after our introductions, we're going to talk about the goal of the program and why there's a current need. We're going to talk a little bit about the partnership and how we end up coming together around this issue, and what we hope it will do, and finally how it's going to be funded. So as we move to the next slide, Niles, tell us a little bit about what the goal of the LeverAge program is.
Thank you, John. I'm happy to do that. The goal is several-fold. First, we wanted to bring together philanthropy, service providers, and the financial community in a new way to meet the growing need for affordable senior housing and related services. We want to accelerate the development of new models and capacity through a dedicated program familiar with the industry and government reimbursement. And I think that's a very important phrase, familiar with the industry, because many traditional lenders are not. We want a consistent source of affordable and flexible financing, really going to the same point, and credit support for emerging innovations not qualifies for conventional debt. We want to provide a new and scalable debt source that can reduce dependence on philanthropy by readily combining with existing and remaining federal and state debt sources and guarantees, public subsidies, and sponsor resources. And going back to that top phrase, a new debt source. I will come back in a bit to why that is so important. And then finally, providing an opportunity for LeverAge and GIA members to help through mission deposits.
Well, great. And on the next slide, you can see that the three people who are speaking today are listed here. But I do want to draw your attention to the fact that each of us represents a different aspect of this programmatic development. I, as CEO of Grantmakers In Aging, obviously represent an association of philanthropic organizations who provide funding for aging programs. LeverAge, you will hear about more in terms of its role as a national convener and association of providers of long-term care services, and of course, the National Cooperative Bank has been a strong partner in this arena for a long time. Many of you know something of my background, but I also want to point out to you that Niles has a background until very recently of over 20 years of service in Congress as a staff member in the Senate primarily, and working on public policy and advocacy issues having to do with retirement security, housing, and many other things, and recently left his position as staff director of the Joint Economic Committee in the Senate to join LeverAge. Robert Jenkins has worked, and many of you are familiar with his work, particularly on greenhouses and other programs. He has been involved with over 100 community organizations to help them find financing, build, and open housing with service programs throughout the country. So we're glad to have all of them. So as we move on to the next slide, Niles, could you tell us something more in depth about LeverAge?
Sure, I'm happy to. LeverAge's mission is to expand the world of possibility for aging, and I know that sounds very broad, but I'll flesh it out here a little bit. LeverAge has about 6,000 mission-driven, not-for-profit aging organizations. All of our members are not-for-profits. We have 39 state affiliates working on very similar things at the state level. Some of our stakeholders and partners include consumer groups, foundations, research partners, related businesses, consultants, and many others. We're really proud to say that our members touch 4 million lives every day, including especially the low-income elderly folks who utilize their services. Among the services that LeverAge members provide is affordable, independent housing for low-income seniors, low-income, very low-income, and extremely low-income. High-quality long-term care, including nursing home and assisted living, home and community-based services, including home care, hospice, PACE, adult daycare, Meals on Wheels. And we also do a lot of advocacy within the administration, the agencies, and within Congress. We, for example, have helped lead the fight to protect against Medicaid funding when many in Congress wanted to fight that for long-term care funding and many other issues that affect folks, especially those with lower incomes.
Thanks. As we move to the next slide, Robert, let's turn to you. Could you give us a similar introduction to the National Cooperative Bank?
Sure. Thanks, John. The mission of the National Cooperative Bank is to meet the financial needs of organizations operating with cooperative principles, which includes, in our definition, not-for-profits. We were organized under an act of Congress back in 1978. We're owned by 2,600 of our borrowers, and which are both cooperatives and not-for-profit customers. And then, very importantly, we're driven by a significant federal best efforts mandate to support cooperative expansion, but also to keep about 35% of our lending in or more in communities that are considered low-income or projects serving low-income individuals. And as a result, we have a significant focus on community development. We have about $1.6 billion in assets. We have about $7.5 billion in assets under management for others. and we have a very, very high safety and soundness rating through the IDC rating program.
As we move to the next slide, let's stay with you, Robert. Has NCB been involved in funding in this area for a long time?
We have, John, and it was really one of the reasons that we worked with Grantmakers In Aging and LeverAge to develop the LeverAge program. We've been actively lending in healthcare and long-term care since 1980. We've made, over that period, about $1 billion in loans to healthcare, long-term care, and aging-focused programs. And part of that has then allowed us to become very comfortable with the public payer programs, the payers themselves, obviously particularly including Medicaid and Medicare, which is often not the case for other lenders. And overall, since about 1980, we've put about $5.4 billion into low-income financing, either in low-income communities or, again, in projects serving low-income individuals. Our current mission portfolio today totals about $450 million.
Great. On the next slide, Niles, let's go back to you. Tell us a little bit about why there's a need for a new program like this.
Sure. There are some really startling statistics, John. The percent of the population, or the number of folks in the population over age 65, will grow by 15 million people between 2010 and 2020, an increase of well over a third. This is what some folks would refer to as the silver tsunami, and it only picks up in speed after 2020. There's a need for 1.8 million new affordable rental units needed for people in that age group by 2020. This number shocked me. The number of elderly homeless is expected to increase by 1/3 between 2010 and 2020. And long-term care expenditures, which are driven by people with lack of good housing, will increase by 26% over that same time period. At a time of increasing demand, the aging population, traditional sources of funding are decreasing. There's only one program left where the federal government funds affordable housing anymore, and the one program that used to exist specifically for seniors has been completely wiped out.
That is startling information. Robert, as we go to the next slide, could you follow up on that comment and talk a little bit about why the current federal and private funding sources are not sufficient to meet this need?
Sure. As John mentioned in the introductions, I worked for many years putting together and providing technical assistance to nonprofits and community-based organizations developing innovative long-term care programs, both under the Coming Home program and the Greenhouse Project. So that gave me a lot of exposure to just how difficult it is to put these programs together. Some of the programs fit very nicely into current government-subsidized programs. So HUD programs, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the United States Department of Agriculture programs. Many can use bonds very effectively, and some fit well with commercial banks. And those options really continue to be a very important piece of the financing puzzle. Unfortunately, those same programs don't work for many of the projects that those of us who are on the phone care most about. So critical services in low-income communities where there's not a private pay market or an easy exit strategy, as well as for innovations that combine housing with services in ways that the HUD or Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac programs just never anticipated and are not designed to accommodate. They also struggle, many of the projects we work with and that the LeverAge program is targeted toward, struggle because they're too small for some of the obvious funding sources, including bond financing, which requires a certain size due to its issuance costs. Also, some of those same projects struggle to be financed through commercial banks because of the short terms that commercial banks typically offer, which generally are between 3 and 5 years. And the fact that short term and the refinancing that comes at the end of that really introduces a great deal of interest rate risk at the refinancing, and projects worry that they won't be able to handle the cost of higher mortgage payments when that refinancing takes place. There's also a little bit of a struggle with all of those programs that the lenders involved are not particularly experienced or familiar with housing, particularly when it combines services or pure service programs, and that can be a real struggle for projects getting through the financing program. And then finally, the current programs and more of the formulaic approach that they use results in a really fairly high level of discomfort with new models that they can't easily understand, maybe don't have a lot of information or track record behind them.
Right. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
All right, John, go ahead.
Well, before we move on to the details about the program, which is up next, Robert, I wanted to remind our guests of a couple things. One is you all saw in the chat function that's on your screen, on the right of your screen, the address to get copies of the slides of today's presentations. I also want to remind you that at any point during the presentation, you can start typing in your questions for our speakers today, and we'll be answering those questions at the end of the presentation in 15 or 20 minutes. But you can go ahead and start typing in your questions now, and we'll be reading those as they come in. So, Robert, at this point, why don't you take us through the program in some detail and tell us how this all works on the next slide.
Great. Thank you, John. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. We have about 8 slides just giving an overview of the program, and we want to be sure to leave a lot of time for everyone's questions. The focus of the leverage lending program is really twofold. It's senior housing, and that includes housing with services, and then very importantly, aging services that may not have a real estate component. So more working capital and cash flow loans, which are, again, a little bit more difficult to find when you're putting together programs serving low-income communities. So on the senior housing side, the focus of the program and what it delivers, the gap really in financing that it's trying to address, is to deliver very flexible mortgage lending, so flexible in the sense that the project doesn't have to fit into a predetermined box, providing up to a 30-year amortization and up to a 10-year loan term, so 2 things that are often not available either in the local community or through a program that works for the project. And then an interest rate discount of between 0.5% and 1.5%, which is made possible by the mission deposits, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then the program really designed to support the growth of senior affordable housing and housing with services. On the aging services side, the benefits of the program are that it provides consistently available access to qualified organizations who need working capital or cash flow loans. It can go up to a 7-year term for those working capital and cash flow loans. Again, an interest rate discount of 0.5% or more. And then again designed to support the expansion of proven aging services innovations that have been shown to be scalable. The program also focuses on critical programs and innovations which may not meet standard underwriting approaches from banks or the federal programs. And we do that through a smaller part of the program that's focused on mission deposits that are willing to provide credit support to those new models. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. Next slide. For those of you who have either been through this process or are working with grantees and are familiar with their programs, to talk just a little bit about the loan parameters so you know which projects may fit and which ones may not. So the loan size is deliberately designed to serve small to medium-sized projects, as I mentioned earlier, many of these projects are not eligible for other programs because they're too small. There's either not enough fee income involved, or they just can't bear the cost of issuance. So small to medium size, anywhere from $500,000 to $12 million. We can handle larger loans than $12 million, but it requires us to find a lending partner to participate, which we're willing to do. It's a little more complicated. The term, as I mentioned, longer term, 10 years for up to 10 years for real estate loans, up to 7 years for the business lending. The rate, as I mentioned, between 0.5% and 1.5% below the current commercial rate at the time for NCB. Amortization is considered long by industry standards, up to 30 years on real estate, and then varies by the business lending purpose. And on the affordability, our standard for affordability is that the project must serve at least 40% of its participants who have incomes at 80% of area median income or below. So that's actually a very reasonable affordability standard. And we did that because the subsidy is not deep in this program, but also because we believe that a mixed income approach is a very important and strong way to create faster and broader replication in programs. So allowing the projects to have that mixed income approach, whether it's high income or whether it's simply mixing low income with moderate income. Next slide, please. So the contribution that NCB is making to the partnership with Grantmakers In Aging and LeverAge is that we will match dollar for dollar the deposits and contributions that are made into the 5- and 10-year mission deposits, which we'll, again, talk about a little bit later in the presentation. We provide an additional interest rate subsidy through discounted NCB net interest and margins. The origination fee that we provide in the program is below the market origination fees typically charged. And then probably the most importantly, on the standard loans that are made through the LeverAge program, NCB assumes all of the credit risk. We're not asking depositors to assume that credit risk. We're not asking Grantmakers In Aging or LeverAge to share those credit risks. And then finally, the refinancing risk. At the end of the LeverAge loan terms, if the project is not doing well, if the pro forma didn't turn out the way we and the sponsor expected, NCB assumes the risk that a refinancing will not be possible at that time, and we will not be able to exit the loan at the end of the term. Next slide, please. So the benefits of the program for innovations, and this is really where all three partners spent a lot of time thinking about what the gaps in financing were and how we could benefit innovations. So one of the significant benefits of LeverAge is that it's scalable. As we collect deposits, we can grow the program, and NCB has committed to matching deposits up to $35 million. So if we have $35 million in deposits, we'll end up with $70 million in the pool to lend out. And certainly if the program is going well, we can go beyond that. The second very important benefit to innovations is that this is a program that's consistently available. It doesn't depend on the local lenders. It doesn't depend on a particular program. It's available nationally. And the sponsor, particularly for a replication program, can come back to us time and time again and expect to get the same terms if they have a qualified project. This is different from a local bank, which might make 1 or 2 loans to a sponsor to fulfill their Community Reinvestment Act obligations, but may not be able to handle a 5, 6, 8 site expansion. The next benefit is program fit and flexibility. So there are not many hard and fast underwriting rules for us, project-type rules for us. It's really designed to evaluate the individual programs, the individual proposals, and be able to determine one by one on their merits whether they would qualify for a loan at the time. The affordability of the program is obviously a significant benefit, and then the credit support feature, which could allow a new innovation which would not, again, meet standard underwriting criteria to receive enough credit support that it becomes a lendable project, taking some of the pressure off of both grant support and perhaps allowing some projects to move forward that would not have otherwise been able to do that. And then finally, the bank's expertise in non-traditional markets in all of the regulatory revenue and expense issues that surround aging services, housing with services, and then just a straight affordable housing. And because we understand those well, we can really come to terms with what may appear to be risk, but to other lenders, but may not be risk, or at least can be mitigated risk. So that would allow more of the loans to move forward, more projects to be developed. Next slide, please. The benefits to the borrowers are the low issuance fees that I mentioned earlier, the interest rate stability with the fixed rates for many of the loans over 7 to 10 years. We will also make variable rate loans, but a fixed rate option is available. The credit support, as I've mentioned before, which enhances the project's debt capacity, reduces the project's reliance on grants and equity investments, which helps facilitate the spread of those projects. Below market interest rates, so that the project sponsors can support more debt. Lower rates, which simply reduce the cost of the borrowing and either allows a project to become viable or allows the project to use the savings in other areas of their mission. And then the longer term, as I mentioned, reducing the refinancing risk for the borrower and the lender. Next slide, please. So an important part of the LeverAge program is the funding side. As I mentioned, the bank is willing to provide a dollar-for-dollar match, but we are very much, and the program very much depends on mission deposits for the $35 million in outside capital. And these deposits are important because they both provide our ability to have the longer term, because the deposits are for 5 or 10 years, and that mitigates the bank's interest rate risks. And then they're also important because they are put in at a below-market CD, or certificate of deposit rate, and that creates the subsidy and the affordability of the loans that I mentioned earlier, the 0.5% to 1.5% discount. Next slide, please. So the deposits, and this is certainly an area that we hope foundations will consider. We are talking to all of the leading age members who have the ability to make a deposit, as well as seeking other mission investors. The deposits are available, the standard deposits are available for 5 or 10-year terms. They are at an interest rate of 0.75% to 1.5%, depending on the term. The minimum deposit size is $100,000, and there is a significant early withdrawal penalty so that we can maintain the yield, because we will be lending against those, so we will be obligated for the full term of the CDs on the loan side. And then we have made a provision that if the deposits are not deployed within 18 months of being received, if we're not able to find a loan to use the deposits that have been provided, then the depositor does have the option at that time to withdraw the deposit, so that they won't risk having us hold the deposit but not be able to deploy it. The benefits to the program of the Advantage mission deposits and to the field of aging, and certainly the innovations in the field of aging, is that they provide a very stable, low-cost, and long-term funding base for the lending that we will do to affordable housing and services. Benefit to the depositors as well is that their deposit is leveraged by the dollar-for-dollar match, so it's doubled. The mission deposits are FDIC insured up to the limits of FDIC insurance, typically $250,000, and that makes it a very safe investment for the depositors. NCB's very strong capitalization and high safety and soundness rating. Also protect, obviously, any investment, certainly any investment beyond the FDIC insurance. And then the mission deposits, the standard mission deposits are not exposed to any of the program's loan credit risks. So if a loan fails during the loan period, that's not something that the depositors will be responsible for, unless they elect to be in a special program, which I'll talk about in the next couple of slides. Next slide, please. So the mission investment, the sort of specialized pool of deposits that would be at risk, are designed to provide that credit support, again, to allow a program that would not otherwise qualify for under standard lending criteria to move forward and to receive a loan when the program is otherwise considered to be viable. So those mission investments are for the same 5 and 10-year terms. The interest rate is higher because it's not providing a subsidy in rate, but rather a subsidy through the credit support and the risk sharing. These are then subject to program credit loss if there is any. Minimum deposit is the same size, $100,000, and again, if they're not deployed within 18 months, they would be the depositor could ask to have those back. So these are the really deep mission deposits that are doing the hardest work in the program. The benefits is that they again provide that stable, subsidized funding base, but most importantly, they support the development and spread of affordable and emerging aging services that, again, might not receive the lending support that they need. Next slide, please. So I think it's important to know that the folks on the phone with you today, both at GIA and LeverAge, have each made significant deposits in the program as founding depositors, and we've also had several other organizations from the LeverAge family of members and state affiliates either make deposits or commit deposits in the new year. So we're off to a very good start. But if we're really going to hit the goals of the program and really be able to have an impact on speeding up the replication of innovations, creating sort of critical mass in aging services, we'll certainly need the help of everyone on the phone today and those who might refer to the program.
Well, thanks, Robert. And as we move to the next slide, we'll be moving to our discussion. Robert, I wondered if you could tell us how to contact you, since you're going to be the point person for folks who have a particular interest in the program in terms of either participating as a depositor or a possible loan candidate. So how would they get a hold of you? Sure.
The best way is either by email or phone. My phone number is 703-302-1950. That's 703-302-1950. My email is pretty straightforward, except that my last name is spelled a little differently. It's first initial R, last name Jenkins. Jenkins is Jenkens, and then it's at ncb.coop. So RJENKENS at ncb.coop.
Great. Thanks so much. At this point, we're going to move to your questions. Once again, on the box you see at the right hand of your screen, there's a question section. If you just drop down that menu, you could type in your questions, and I will be asking them of our participants today. And the first one is actually for me and for Grantmakers in Aging, so let me start with that one. And the question is a pretty simple one. Why is GIA involved in this program? And I think there's several reasons for that. Obviously, the need for affordable housing and innovative senior services is something we work in a great deal. Many of our members are very directly related to these areas, and our work in creating age-friendly communities housing and innovative services related to housing are often a central need that communities talk about. So we're certainly involved in the area of need. I think we're also very interested in finding new ways for philanthropy to play a larger role in these, what are often very complex arrangements, where many local and regional foundations do not feel they have the technical expertise to create these kind of loan programs on their own, don't feel that they have the ability to really look at loan applications in a way that is fiscally prudent, and so they shy away from them. So what we're also trying to do is provide not only our members but others with opportunities to participate in these arenas in a way that meets their needs as well. And it's a particularly interesting process because foundations and other funders are used to giving money away straightforwardly, so the traditional grant mechanism. This is obviously a different mechanism where you're depositing the money in a bank and you will get the money back at some point with interest, but it also in the meantime meets the mission of many of our foundation members, so that's why we've been involved. And actually, Niles, why don't we turn to you and ask a similar question. Why is LeverAge involved in this, and how do you see your members participating in this program?
Yeah, thanks. That's a very good question. Well, LeverAge is involved on a very basic level because it's been its mission for a great many decades to help seniors age in ways that improve their lives, allow them to keep their dignity, and extend their quality of life just as long as possible. And I have never seen a more dedicated group of people, both here in Washington and out in the States. And there are a great many things that our members are experimenting with, and that's what I find really interesting is that I'm starting to travel the country. I'm seeing that our members are doing completely different things. I found one place, for example, where I was just yesterday, where they have a memory care facility, and one of the things they found is that if they bring in people who do different things, some play music, some are good at some age-appropriate physical activities. There's someone who writes poetry, for example, and they teach elderly people who are thought to be at risk or are starting to experience some kind of dementia. They get them to do something completely different than anything they've ever done before. So if they're a great musician, for example, they'll try to get them to, to ride a bike or to write poetry or something, an entirely new skill set. And they find that this really improves their ability to stay cognitively stable longer. They have found that in many facilities, sort of the older models still, as a person needs services, they have to move from one wing of a building into another, or from one floor to a building into another. And what they found is what happens then is seniors hide their health conditions because they don't want to move, because they're neighbors they've lived next to for 15 years and they really like them. And so they've said, okay, you can stay exactly where you are and we will bring the services to you no matter where you are. And just something really small like that really improves the quality of care. And finally, we have the studies to show that when done correctly, just from a public policy point of view, that providing the kind of housing with services that we do, it saves the taxpayers money on Medicare and other health care costs.
Well, great. And I know that some of the LeverAge members are, in fact, already and are also considering deposits in this program. Robert, let's return to you at this point. Some of the issues that are being raised are, is this going to be a national program from the beginning, or are you targeting specific geographic regions? And a similar issue is when would the program start lending funds?
Great questions, John. We will be national from the very start. Our footprint is national now. The healthcare and long-term lending we've done in the past has always been national, and we feel that that's one of the real strengths that the bank brings to the partnership for LeverAge, is that we can really address the needs of projects large and small across the United States. So that's and particularly in low-income communities that are either underserved or perhaps not served by standard financial institutions. And then we are actually already started on our lending program. The program was announced in October, and we had actually even before that tested a couple of loans. So we are receiving applications. We're working on underwriting. We've issued term sheets, and we've actually closed one financing that's benefited by the test during the test period for the program. So we are very sure and have experienced the need for the program, and I think as word gets out with the publicity that's planned, we'll see plenty of need, plenty of people who are interested in obtaining the loans. Our challenge will be that the program can only serve as many people as we receive the deposits, and then the bank matches those deposits for. So I'm a little bit concerned as momentum builds on the lending side that we have to really need to be out there talking to our peers in our network around the deposit side, which I will spend a lot of time focused on at the beginning of this coming year. And John, I know that you and Niles will be doing a lot of that as well.
That's correct. And I just wanted to point out several of you had asked in the questions to once again have Robert's contact information, and that has just been sent out to all of you in the chat box, which is at the bottom of your right-hand screen. So to go to some other questions, Niles, let's return to you. This is a question from your congressional days, which is why has the federal government moved away from affordable housing funding? And do you see any change in that in the likely future?
Yeah, boy, is that a good question. I think the simplest answer is that there has been such an emphasis on cutting the federal deficit that really the entire federal government has taken a big hit. I forget the exact dollar amount now, but in the last 3 years, I think it's $4 trillion that's been cut from the deficit just in the last 3 years alone. As far as where things go from here, that really all depends. Under current law, there will be another round of these deep, deep budget cuts known as sequestration that go into effect in January of, I think it's January of 2016, and that will just be devastating to much of the federal government in terms of, and including what we do. I am hopeful that Congress and the President will find a way to avoid those cuts, but we'll see if they can agree on much of anything over the next couple of years. Just to give you an example, there used to be a program that for 2 decades built facilities. There was only one program dedicated in the entire federal government toward low-income senior housing, and it was funded at hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and Congress just in one fell swoop completely zeroed it out about 3 years ago, just made it go away entirely. And we'd like to see it come back. We're asking Congress to come back, to make it come back, but I just don't know. So the next couple of years especially are going to be tough, which is why we are trying to do creative things like working with NCB and Grantmakers in Aging to help fill the gap that currently exists.
John, this is Robert. I would just add to what Niles said that when we were designing LeverAge, as you remember, with Grantmakers in Aging and Leading Age, one of the issues was not knowing what will come. And so the program is designed to either supplement what's available and left in the federal programs, and hopefully that that will grow or stay the same, or if it is further reduced, we'll still be able to work with those programs. But then very specifically, it's designed to jump into the gaps where either those programs have exited or where the need has simply outpaced the availability of some of those programs.
And let me just say, I'd be remiss if I didn't add one final thing, John. We at LeverAge are working vigorously to change the kind of dynamic that I just mentioned. Our members, there was recently an issue in the closing days of the Congress here. We sent a call out to our members, and within about 20 hours, we had about 1,400 letters in to members of Congress. And we have a team of us that do sort of traditional shoe leather lobbying on Capitol Hill and try to help lawmakers understand this. But I just want to make that point very clearly that we work very, very hard and vigorously to keep up the good fight on this.
And it's going to be quite a fight. And we're very appreciative of that work. Robert, you talked about in several components that most of our discussion has been around the development and financing of affordable housing, and I think that's an idea that people understand to some degree and can get their heads around. But you also talked about the more innovative programs that might also be funded by this program. Could you give us an example of that so that we can give people a better sense of what those might be?
Sure. There's a great example that we've been working on recently, and that's a couple of organizations that have come together to launch a PACE program for all-inclusive care for the elderly. So a really strong model of comprehensive care with wraparound services, specifically designed to keep people out of institutions, a really complex capitated model, so it basically becomes an insurance policy that the providers are offering. So PACE programs have been around for a while, but they haven't grown. I think we just went past maybe 100 PACE programs nationally. So certainly have not grown quickly enough to meet the need or the demand, and part of that has been because as a complicated risk-based model, they've really had trouble finding financing. They've had to really grow from within. They've had to grow from what capital their sponsors were able to provide to them. So we're working very closely with this partnership to structure a financing for a program that's actually even more complicated than a regular PACE program. So it is a program that will be a startup, which is often an area that lenders shy away from. It's in a rural community, which is a much more difficult program to run and to make the numbers work. And the program itself, because of the limitations of the sponsors, really can't benefit from significant guarantees or support from the sponsoring organization. So there's not a lot of backup from a lender's perspective if something starts to go wrong. So this program would actually benefit from all aspects of the LeverAge program. It would have some portion of its loan that it could support through sort of a standard underwriting process, but it will also have a portion of its need that may need to be supported through the credit enhancement program of LeverAge. So being able to apply this program and move that forward in the absence of any other lender who is willing to do it right now would mean that there would be a new PACE program serving 200-plus seniors in a rural area that wouldn't have existed without the program. And that would be a working capital operating loan. PACE, as some of you may know, while it has a little bit of real estate, it's primarily a services program. So very little collateral beyond some of the leaseholds that they have. So again, a more complicated lending to do because you're really analyzing the cash flows and the future projections for the program.
Thanks. That's very helpful. And I think what it shows is that we're talking about programs that are innovative and are also ones that are very difficult to put together because of their complexity. And this is a wonderful example. But let me follow up with a related question that someone has asked, having to do with what affordable housing means exactly in this context. So the question is it folks that are already in Medicaid or other low-income programs, or is there more flexibility, or is this done on a case-by-case basis? Specifically asking about if the target population is somewhat above the poverty level for the region, does that qualify, or is that something that you're going to be looking at on an individual basis?
John, a good question. We have tried very hard to keep the program as open as possible, both in how it approaches lending and structuring loans, as well as who would qualify. So our minimum standard is that for any service program or any housing program, that they need to serve at least 40% of the people who receive services or live there. And those who have an income of less than 80% of the area median income. And that's a fairly light standard for affordability. Many of the tax credit and other government programs require much deeper subsidies to reach lower income people. And when I mentioned that we had really designed this program to work together with other subsidies, that was part of it. We didn't want to make our standard harder than other programs that might need to be combined with this. So, for instance, for affordable housing that's financed with low-income housing tax credits, the LeverAge program could provide the traditional or the standard loan to go along with those tax credits. We didn't want our standard to get in the way of being combined with those. And again, the program could also be used without any federal or other subsidy included, in which case our subsidy is not great enough to create a deep level of affordability. So we didn't want to set a standard that was not achievable given the subsidies we were able to provide. And much of the way the world is moving is in sort of public-private partnerships that look at serving all of the income levels in the community. So again, we wanted to have a significant low-income focus because of the subsidy that will be provided and the mission investments that will support that, but not such a big demand that we found very few projects that would qualify.
Okay. That's very helpful. We're coming to the end of our time before I ask all of our speakers to make their final comments, but I do want to ask a particularly interesting question, which says, since we're thinking outside the box, is there any way that individuals could use some of their retirement funds from IRAs or in retirement investments to invest in this opportunity?
Absolutely. It's a great out-of-the-box thought. So anybody who has funds to invest and is willing to invest them either in the CDs that have a lower return than a market return, but again, no risk, or in the mission investments where the CDs will provide really a market rate of return for a 5 or 10-year CD, but those individuals would be assuming credit risk for the loans that are made or the loans that are supported through those deposits. So absolutely, anyone with a mission and a willingness can be a depositor in this program.
Great. And once again, Robert's contact information is on your screen in the chat box at the right of your screen. I also want to remind you that the slides for this presentation are available, and that is also listed there in the chat box, and also that we do rebroadcast these webinars within about a week to 10 days. And so those are also free and available to any of your colleagues who may not have been able to join us today but want to do that. So either from the emails we have sent to you or from the GIA website, please go there and the link will be listed within the next 2 weeks. So at this point, I want to ask our speakers to give their final thoughts, and since Grantmakers in Aging is one of those organizations, I will start. We think at GIA that this is an enormously important area, but one that is very complicated and very difficult for most foundations and other funders to work in, because it is so complicated, so heavily regulated, and such a long-term investment. That said, it does support many of the programs that our members and other funders in aging are interested in, and we certainly hope that everyone will take a look at whether or not this program specifically meets both your investment needs but also your programmatic needs in the community. Niles, how about you? What are some final comments from you to our audience today?
Yeah, I would just emphasize again something I've said a couple of times, and that is that there is a rapidly growing gulf between the need for resources and the resources that are available to meet those needs. A substantial portion of our elderly population is low income or lower, and they are reaching the age where they need not just housing, though they need housing, but also the kind of services that keep them happier and healthier longer. We talked about the budget situation, the political situation here in Washington. We are doing our best and working real hard to turn that around, but we face substantial challenges. And that's why programs like this that are innovative and flexible and have all the attributes that Robert talked about will be increasingly important in meeting the needs of America's low-income seniors.
Thanks. Robert?
Sure. No, John, if I think back on the 25 or more years that I've been involved in aging services, housing with services, both policy and development around those, I think about really what an incredibly generous country we have been in the past, the commitment that providers, many of whom are members of LeverAge, have shown. But when I think about what maybe hasn't worked well with the system, it's been that we have really limited people's choices to a very few models. And we have now entered a really exciting period where those choices are really exploding. Innovation's exploding, creativity is exploding. We understand a little bit better how to pursue quality outcomes and some of the models and options that we need for that. Unfortunately, just as we've hit that really exciting period, we've also started to limit or run out of the dollars that have funded the creation of new models, new services for people who are aging. So I'm really excited. I don't think the LeverAge program will address a significant deficit in the government spending, but I'm very excited about it for two reasons. One is it will make a meaningful difference for many of the communities where it will allow services to move forward. And then I'm also very excited that it will provide an example, perhaps something that can be replicated by other lenders and other partnerships to further increase the availability of the funding. So if we can get it kicked off strongly, if we can show its impact, I'm excited to think that others may join and follow behind and actually get us to the scale that we need to address all of the many aging issues that GIA is so focused on.
So I want to thank Robert Jenkins, the Director of Social Impact Initiatives and Senior Vice President at the National Cooperative Bank, and Niles Godis, the Senior Vice President of Housing and Capital at LeverAge, for their participation in today's program. We thank you for all that you do to make life better for older adults. I also want to thank the John A. Hartford Foundation, the McGregor Foundation, the National Cooperative Bank, and LeverAge for their support of this program, as well as the American Society on Aging for their technical expertise. Please join us in 2015 for a new series of webinars on important topics in aging. Watch your email or the GIA website for registration information. And finally, I want to thank all of you for participating in today's webinar. Happy holidays.